we're going to actually just focus on the blood, and I'm going to bring in the lymphoid system within the blood. Blood is much easier to understand than cardiovascular, so but a majority of it is memorization. Okay, so blood. Men have 1.5 gallons, women have 1 gallon. It's 8% of the body weight. Okay? Function, transportation. What do you think the blood transports? Only nutrients? Oxygen is nutrient.
Gases, waste.
Gases are again nutrients. Waste. Anything else? Anything else? What did you have your exam on? Yes, you did. So hormones. It also does regulation. What do you think the blood regulates? Blood pressure, what else? It does the pH. Okay? Because our blood actually contains a buffer. What was somebody else saying? No. Defense. How does it defend? White blood cells contains white blood cells. Another regulation, it regulates blood loss. Why?
Replenishes.
Huh?
The blood like replenishes.
No, because it has platelets, right? And it has other stuff, which we'll talk about later. Composition. It's a cellular part. Cellular part is also called formed elements. Okay? Cellular part and the fluid part, plasma. So it has a plasma, which is a fluid part, which is 55%, and then it has a cellular part, which is formed elements, which is 45%. Okay? Blood. So cellular part and plasma. Right? Cellular part broken down into 3 cells. Red blood cells. What are red blood cells called? Erythrocytes. Then you have white blood cells. What are the white blood cells called? Leukocytes. And then you have platelets, which are called thrombocytes. Okay? Now, certain characteristic of red blood cell, it's packed with a protein called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin. Okay? Function, transport nutrients. Right? It transports, well, I won't say nutrients, sorry, oxygen. Transports oxygen. Other characteristics we'll get into a little bit later. White blood cells are split up into 2 main categories. You have granulocyte and you have agranulocyte. Okay? And between each, you have different type of cells. Okay? So you have granulocytes and agranulocytes. So white blood cells, there are multiple types of white blood cells, leukocytes, and they're split up into granulocytes and agranulocytes. And we'll talk about them a bit later. What is the function of platelets? Clot formation. Okay. Now, what is a plasma made up of? Water. Plasma is made up of water, made up of protein. Okay. It's water, protein, hormones, okay. Macromolecules. What does macromolecules mean? Glucose, amino acids, and ions. what plasma is made up of. The main thing you have to know is proteins. Now there are 3 types of proteins. Albumin, which is the main one, it's 2/3 of the plasma protein. Clotting proteins. So albumin, clotting proteins, and globins. Globins. Those are the 3 types of proteins we have in our plasma. We don't talk about each other. Okay. So this you guys already know, and you guys can fill this in. Don't skip this slide. You're responsible to know it, but we already discussed it. Okay, plasma, composition, water. These are supposed to be right here. So water, hormones, ions, macromolecules, examples of macromolecules, amino acids, grades, glucose, etc. It contains proteins, which there are 3 main types of proteins: albumin, globulins, and clotting proteins. Okay? Let's talk about albumin more in detail. 2/3 of the plasma proteins. Production, liver. Function of albumin. Transports stuff. Okay, different stuff can bind to albumin. Certain drugs can bind to it. Certain hormones can bind to it. So stuff. Okay, I'm just gonna. Okay, it transports stuff because at some point bilirubin binds to it. At some point certain drugs bind to it. Certain ions bind to it. So stop. Now, another function of albumin, which is our main function, is it creates and maintains the oncotic pressure. It creates and maintains the oncotic pressure. What does oncotic pressure mean? O-N-C-O-T-I-C. Oncotic pressure. Oncotic pressure means pressure created by proteins. What is that classic thing about alcoholic? Just by looking at them. How do you know if somebody's alcoholic?
Jaundice.
Jaundice is one. What else? Okay, what else? Okay, anything else? Huh? Smell of alcohol? Don't they usually have a pot belly? Pot belly? Right? Usually it's called, that pot belly is called ascites. It's usually filled with fluid. This one happens when the liver is failing, of course. But basically what happens, because your liver is producing albumin. Albumin creates the pressure created by proteins within your vessels. Okay? So, if your liver is failing, it's not creating albumin. The concentration of albumin within your vessels drop. How would you increase the concentration of albumin if you can't add more to it? But how do you create, how would you raise the pressure? If I have a vessel, I have, let's say, albumin, okay, let's say the concentration is 10 right now. How do I increase the concentration of albumin without pouring more albumin inside? Any idea?
Get rid of the other stuff?
Huh?
Get rid of all the other stuff?
Which is?
Or blood?
Blood is plasma and cellular. So what part are you talking about? What part can you actually get rid of? You're on the right track. You get rid of the water. So if you take out the water, right? So you have a pot full of water and sugar. It's not that sweet, okay? If you can't add any more sugar to it, how do you make that sweet? You boil it, right? What does boiling do? What does it do to the water? So it gets rid of the water, right? And doesn't the solution become more sweet? Same concept, okay? So albumin is decreased, and you can't add more albumin because your liver is failing, but you need to add that pressure, raise that pressure. So you take away the water. The water leaves the vessels, and it enters the space between the cells. And that's called sinus. So the water leaves the vessels and enters the surrounding tissue. And this is why they have a pot belly. Okay? Okay, so 2/3 of the plasma protein produced by the liver functions. It transports a lot of stuff throughout the blood, throughout the body. And under the main function, it creates and maintains the oncotic pressure. Clotting proteins. Now, there are 12 different types of clotting proteins. The two I want you to know is fibrinogen and prothrombin. Fibrinogen and prothrombin are the two clotting proteins I want you to know. Okay? Regardless which one I talk about, all 12 of them are produced by the liver. Now, clotting proteins are clot formation. Okay, so stops you from bleeding. Okay, globulins. There are 3 different types: alpha, beta, and gamma. Alpha basically is found within the hemoglobin. Beta is also found within hemoglobin, also found in the structure called the lipoproteins or lipoproteins. What is it? It's beta-globulin chain plus cholesterol. You have 2 types, LDL and HDL. HDL stands for high-density lipoproteins, and then LDL stands for low-density lipoproteins. So high-density lipoproteins, low-density lipoprotein. Now, what is similar between, let's say, a commercial of Cheerios, a commercial of that soup, Progresso soup? What is the thing that you always hear about them? Lowers your cholesterol. It's heart protective, right? Because the thing, those foods, okay, anytime you see something that has a heart shape and it says beneficial heart, because they actually have a high level of HDL, okay? High density lipoprotein. High density lipoprotein actually takes cholesterol from your bloodstream and eats it up. Therefore, it decreases cholesterol in your bloodstream, in your vessels, decreases the chances of you getting heart attacks. This is why you see the HDL looks like an angel. It reverses risk or chances of, this is a vessel, and right here is that cholesterol. Where HDL, oh, sorry, not HDL, LDL is a devil. It actually increases your chances of heart disease, cardiovascular disease. So high density lipoprotein, low density lipoprotein. Now we have gamma globulins, which are basically immunoglobulins. And we have 5 different types, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I know going fast is not that much to explain, it's just more memorization. Red blood cell, absence of the following organelles. A mature red blood cell does not have mitochondria and nucleus. Okay? A mature red blood cell does not have mitochondria or a nucleus. It loses it. The red blood cell is compact, okay, with hemoglobin. 300 million molecules of hemoglobin in one red blood cell. Function of hemoglobin, oxygen transportation or oxygen binding. Okay, it binds oxygen. Oxyhemoglobin, and you have a deoxyhemoglobin. Oxyhemoglobin is where the hemoglobin molecule is bound to oxygen. Deoxyhemoglobin is where the hemoglobin is not bound to oxygen. Okay? Now, let's look at the hemoglobin structure more in detail. The hemoglobin structure of 4 globulin chains. So it's 2 alpha and 2 beta. So adult hemoglobin is alpha 2, beta 2. Okay? 2 chains are alpha and 2 of the chains are beta. So right here in the image, here is the alpha chain, another alpha chain, beta chain, and the 4th beta chain, or the 2nd beta chain. Okay? So 2 of the chains are alpha and 2 of the chains are beta. These chains, alpha chain, beta chain, they're proteins. Okay? When you look at each chain, regardless if I'm talking about an alpha chain or a beta chain, they have a similar structure. Okay? They both have, right in the heart of it, you could see this protein which is called heme. Right in the center of the chain, regardless if it's alpha or beta, they have a heme group. Heme is again a protein. Right in the center of the heme, you see this red ball. It's iron. Okay? And the function of the iron is to bind oxygen. So, if I ask you what is the function of red blood cell, it binds oxygen. Well, what part of red blood cell binds oxygen? Hemoglobin. What part of hemoglobin actually binds oxygen? It's the iron. Does that make sense? So you have 2 alpha chains, 2 beta chains. Each chain has a heme group right in the middle, right there, right there, right there. And within each heme group, you have an iron molecule right there. Now, so 1 molecule of hemoglobin binds how many molecules of oxygen? Huh? 2. 4. How does it bind 4? Well, this will bind oxygen, this will bind oxygen, this will bind oxygen, this will bind oxygen. Therefore, 1 molecule of hemoglobin will bind 4 molecules of oxygen. Okay? Now, what is hematocrit? Oh, yes. Forget about hematocrit. I forgot to write the shape of red blood cell. A red blood cell is a biconcave disc. It's a biconcave disc. The biconcave disc. But when you look at it under a microscope, it looks like such like this. Where the outside is dark, like a pinkish, and right in the middle, it's more pale. Okay? That's what a red blood cell looks like. It's a biconcave disc, but when you actually look under a microscope, it doesn't look like biconcave disc. It doesn't look like this, where the periphery is more red, okay, pinkish red, and right in the center, it's more pale. Okay. Lifespan. A lifespan of red blood cell, this is saying that it doesn't get destroyed beforehand due to some other reason. It's 120 days. Have you ever heard that a person who has, has anybody heard about a disease called sickle cell anemia? Yes. Now, I don't know if you guys know, a person who has sickle cell anemia could never get malaria. Have you ever heard that? Okay. So basically, sickle cell anemia is where there is a mutation, okay? There's actually a problem with, it's abnormal hemoglobin is being produced. Okay, the hemoglobin is abnormal, sickle cell anemia, and it's more common in African Americans. But a patient who has sickle cell anemia, they cannot get malaria. The reason is malaria is a parasite. It's an infection by a parasite and you get malaria. Malaria takes about, let's say, 100 days to develop. You know, that's long the incubation period is. But a person who has sickle cell anemia, their red blood cells only survive, let's say, for 90 days. So the reason they could never get malaria is because the red blood cells don't last that long. They don't last 120 days, or even the days needed for malaria to develop. Does that make sense? Okay. Elimination. Where are the red blood cells destroyed? Spleen and liver. Cells responsible are macrophages, which are white blood cells. Macrophages are type white blood cells. Once you break down a white blood cell, what do you release? Hemoglobin, right? Hemoglobin will be further broken down to basically the chains. Correct? Each chain will further be broken down to basically heme groups. Correct? Heme and iron, right? Iron will be reabsorbed. What happens to the heme? It gets further broken down, and finally it produces a substance called bilirubin. Okay? How do you know that? First of all, how do you know you have a bruise? And the second thing, how do you know that bruise is basically coming to its end, like it's healing or it's healed? Color. Okay? It starts off as a purplish blue, and what is the end? Yellow. So when you see that purple blue and going through that color changes, it's actually the process of red blood cells being broken down. Okay? So purple blue is where heme is being produced or released, and then the heme gets broken down. That's why it changes colors, and at the end you have that yellow appearance, which is bilirubin. And after yellow, it's gone because bilirubin actually has a yellow color, which gets absorbed. It actually binds albumin. Okay?
What color was the purple?
It's like it's a process of breakdown. Now, production of red blood cell. Location where? Red bone marrow, right? From what cell produces it? What cell turns into red blood cell? Stem cell. Hormone that basically is responsible for causing red blood cell production is called erythropoietin. Erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is a hormone that causes red blood cell to be produced. Erythropoiesis, which is the one right underneath it, okay, erythropoiesis or hematopoiesis is a process, okay, that produces red blood cell. Does that make sense? So the process, what do you call the process that basically the red blood cells are being produced? Erythropoiesis or hematopoiesis. Erythropoietin is a hormone that causes or starts off this whole cycle. Make sense? Stem cells. Cells from which the cellular part of blood is formed. Where do you have the stem cell? Red bone marrow. So A stem cell. A is basically stem cell. B is red blood cell. C and D collectively are white blood cells. But C are granulocytes. And D are agranulocytes.